Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news today, we're going to be talking about higher food prices. That's something we can all expect to pay in 2020, not necessarily looking forward to that for the new year, but 2020 is going to bring higher food prices. Also, the mourners, many of those in Iran, are still mourning the death of their military commander, Soleimani, and what Iran is now planning their next moves, but President Trump is telling them, if you take revenge, we are going to hit you very hard and very fast. So we'll have those details, as well as President Trump is now telling NATO they need to become more involved in the Middle East. So these stories and many more, but first, on a daily basis, we hear about school violence all over the United States, but our first report hits very close to home. Now, the video you are about to see was taken during a news conference explaining a stabbing incident at Abilene High School where two teens were injured during a planned fight. Now, Abilene Police Chief Stan Stanridge and AISD Superintendent Dr. David Young explained the incident. Now, after that, you're going to see a couple of the instructors of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program pose questions and offer solutions at a recent town hall. Take a look at this meeting.
This afternoon we are going to have Chief Stan Standards from the Abilene Police Department and AIC Superintendent Dr. David Young speak to you about an incident earlier this morning at Abilene High School.
This morning, shortly after 8 a.m., AISD leadership became aware of a fight, and ultimately pretty quickly they learned that two persons had possibly been stabbed. The principal calls and requested ambulances because he received preliminary information that several students had been stabbed. Both students that were stabbed are ages 15. The suspect, who is now the arrested party, is age 16. I also want to communicate rather strongly that this act was not random, nor was it spontaneous. Subsequent information has revealed that we believe that the victim and victims in this case were likely aware that the suspect was actually on the campus and may have actually been meeting at a common venue. We suspect that they may have been under the pretense that a fight was going to occur, hence the video that many of our citizens have seen that was taken by one of the students. That video was taken because obviously there was some foreknowledge of what was about to transpire. That video was taken because obviously there was some foreknowledge of what was about to transpire. That video was taken because obviously there was some foreknowledge of what was about to transpire. I can tell you basically it's described as some type of a knife that possibly was contained within the hand, and so it's like a set of brass knuckles, but it had a sharp point that looks like 4 to 6 inches long. So the suspect attacked the primary intended victim repeatedly. The victim did suffer serious bodily injury. We can tell you that the victim suffered either punctures and or slashes. We can say probably definitively 4, maybe 5, we're not exactly sure. He is charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault. Both of those counts are second-degree felonies. I'm going to let Dr. Young talk about the condition of these 2 students.
Thank you, Chief Standridge. Good afternoon, everybody. We thank you for being here today. Unfortunately, we are here today to talk about an incident at Abilene High this morning that left 2 of our students hospitalized. This situation serves as a reminder to all of us that our children are our most precious commodity and that we should do everything we can every day to make sure that they're safe. As I've said to each of you, my number 1 priority is the safety of our students each and every day. That's also the #1 priority of every AISD employee, is to do the very, very best we can each day to ensure the safety of our students and the staff in the Abilene Independent School District. I would say to parents that this, as you have heard from the chief, this was not a random act. We have excellent safety measures in place, and I would assure you that Abilene High School, as well as every campus in the Abilene Independent School District, is an appropriate and safe place for your children.
My name is Chris Heiler. I'm a small business owner here in Abilene, Texas, and I'm also a character education instructor. What can we do to prepare our students in character education to help prepare them to enter society and build up morality in our society?
Governor Abbott's recommendations from his roundtable discussions, I was lucky enough to be there, and he addresses 4 different areas about the violence we have, the problems we have in our school system: prevention, intervention, mitigation, and then recovery.
My name is William Kraus. I'm with the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, and I've seen how just teaching these basic, simple moral principles that weren't taught at home to a lot of these young people and even adults, how it can change their whole mindset very quickly.
I appreciate that, because this, to use my paradigm, is going upriver to figure out why these kids are going downriver to begin with. I'm sensitive to that.
Your name is?
My name is David Knighton. I live in Clyde and do business in Abilene. And my question would be, in teaching students how to cope with their feelings and why to cope with them and how they can achieve a higher position in life, what can we do to increase the counselors that are available in school for the students?
Okay, well, I would say that first off, we've got to let our counselors be counselors. We've got to have a handle on the other logistical tasks that they're asked to complete. I'm married to a counselor, and so I hear about this often.
You know, it's really sad, and you can see there that the leaders within the community don't really have an answer. They know that there's a problem, but they don't really have an answer. They don't know what to do. And so hopefully embracing the peaceful solution within the community, you know, we know that if it's implemented, it can start turning the hearts and the minds of the children and the teachers around.
Absolutely.
Well, while it is very apparent that character education is lacking in our public school system, the reason why might not be so clear. You know, the recent law signed by the governor of Illinois can shed some light on what public schools are being told they need to focus on. Set to take effect for the fall school year of 2020, Illinois public schools will be required to teach students about the contributions of people who identify as part of the LGBTQ community.
Well, the recent mandate dictates that history lessons taught in public schools must include a study of the roles and contributions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people from Illinois, as well as the rest of the United States. Now, the lessons must be taught to students before they complete the 8th grade.
Well, now to a new but familiar threat rising on the continent of Asia. Recently, there was a mysterious pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan, China. Research has discovered the cause of the outbreak is from the same family of coronaviruses that caused the deadly SARS epidemic back in 2003. Well, the World Health Organization says that knowing what the virus is can help authorities around the world to detect and respond faster to outbreaks.
Well, the Chinese state media reported that experts had successfully obtained the genetic sequencing of the virus from one patient and then saw 15 patients test positive for the same strain of the virus.
Wow. So far, South Korea is the only country, or the first country, to report a suspected case outside of China. So officials have stepped up preventative measures across Asia, including the introduction of airport temperature screening. As people pass by, well, the scanners measure their internal body temperature, easily alerting officials to anyone with abnormal temperatures who could possibly be sick.
Well, the research team's report noted that while it can take several weeks to identify the genetic sequencing of the virus, it will take years to develop a vaccine or drugs to cure the disease. Now, the new coronavirus can cause respiratory and intestinal diseases. Now, some people might only feel mild symptoms like that of the common cold, but the fear is that this virus is kin to the severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, and the Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, which have both proven to be fatal.
Right. Well, therefore, the outbreak in Wuhan quickly sparked fears in comparison to that of 2003. Back then, it was thought that SARS was linked to human contact with some small Chinese mammals. This recent outbreak has found that some cases have been linked to a seafood market that sold wild animals. The market has since been closed, and so far there is no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission as there was with SARS.
But there is a lot about the virus that is still unknown. The WHO says more detailed information is needed to confirm the pathogen is part of the coronavirus family, as well as to understand why this outbreak occurred and how the virus is transmitted. And once you have that, as they mentioned there, that person to person, that's where it really becomes pretty deadly and spread very quickly, as we did see with the SARS outbreak back in 2003. If you remember the pictures, everybody wearing the mask and trying not to catch it or spread the disease, but mainly to catch it. So if it does go person to person, that's where it really can take off pretty quickly.
And one thing that we've seen in times past as well, at the early onset of these types of viruses, the majority of what scientists have are speculation. So these viruses, in some cases, depending on what they mix with, can mutate really rapidly and turn into something that is not just zoonotic, but can transmit from human to human unexpectedly. Well, today there are so many options when it comes to food. Have you ever stopped to think about what are truly the healthiest options? Well, this next report from Bloomberg explains why it is so difficult to know what might not be the best choices to feed your family, and it might surprise you. Let's take a look.
Simple question. What's actually healthy for you to eat? We know this is good for you, but is this? What about this? This? Or this? If you're confused over what is and isn't healthy to eat, you're not alone. Knowing what to eat is complicated, and a big reason it's so complicated is as green as your leafy vegetables. So here's the situation. A draft of the most recent U.S. government dietary recommendations said that a healthy diet is lower in red and processed meats, which have been associated with increased death rates from cancer and heart disease. That's until the meat lobby caught wind of it. Now, the caution was dropped from the guidelines. In addition to the food lobbies, the relative youth and unreliability of nutrition science just adds to the confusion. Fats are a perfect example. In the 80s, scientists associated the saturated fats in butter and cream with heart disease, causing consumers to switch to margarine and shortening. When scientists later concluded the trans fats in those alternatives were more dangerous, people started avoiding fats altogether, resulting in the low and non-fat dietary trend in the 90s. That led many to increase their carbohydrates and sugars, which experts say helped cause the obesity and type 2 diabetes epidemic in America. Still, the connection between dietary fats and disease is far from settled. That's because nutrition science relies on observational studies, which can't definitively connect a cause and effect. So for example, all of these come from observational studies. The problem is it's impossible to know for sure if these connections are real, because so many factors can affect the outcome. Now here's the argument. The 2016 nutritional guidelines won praise for being very specific about what you should be eating, like vegetables and whole grains. But they were criticized for keeping the what not to eat section a vague list of nutrients. For example, instead of saying avoid soda, they say to avoid excess sugar. Once again, critics say food lobbyists are to blame. At 204 pages, many say the guidelines on what to eat are simply too long, too complicated, and too influenced by outside forces.
Well, as I mentioned, those outside influences there, you have to wonder, are they really looking out for your own best interests, or are they looking out for their own pocketbook?
Yeah, right.
Well, food is likely one of our most regular occurring expenses in life. Now, on a weekly basis, it can even be the biggest expense. New reports are forecasting the price of food is going up in 2020 by as much as 3 to 6%. So if you've already been struggling to stay within your budget when it comes to groceries, the new price increases might make you have to tighten your belts even more.
Well, experts say there are two things that greatly affect the increase in food prices, and those are: one, too much water, which comes in the form of rainstorms and flooding, and 2, not enough water, which leads to drought due to a lack of rain.
Well, if you think things are bad in the northern hemisphere, they are much worse across the globe. Take Turkey, for example, where the price of produce is continually in the headlines. Now, food prices in the first month of 2020 have seen over a 30% increase from 2019, and overall food prices are at a 20-year high in the country. Now, those who are retired and living on pensions find it hard to support themselves and are actually seeking the help of family members to be able to do so.
People shouldn't have to struggle to figure out how they're going to just take care of their basic needs.
Right.
Well, now to another even more devastating problem in the Middle East. For 2 days, it was quiet across the war-torn Syria. But that ended midweek when Russia and Syrian jets reportedly carried out airstrikes on several towns in the northwest province of Idlib.
Well, video footage has emerged from activists showing charred vehicles, damaged buildings, and casualties. Now, while the attacks were believed to be directed at rebel-held towns, one representative from the White Helmets, a search and rescue group, has claimed civilians were among the casualties in Abilene City.
Well, now we'll turn it over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has some more information for us regarding activities that are continually taking place over in the Middle East area, but also some things that the Japanese defense minister is making known to the public that can definitely affect things in that area as well. Larry, what do you have for us?
Though pyramids emblazoned across dollars topped with all-seeing eyes should have been an obvious clue, many people, however, are still unaware of the deep role and influence of Coptic culture in molding, shaping, and directing the present course of the world. With that being the case, it should be no surprise then today to find Egypt just as much a part of the igniting inferno of global warfare as all other nations who have all logged into the fire. Have a look at this video.
When you think of wars in the Middle East, you usually think of Yemen, Syria, or Iraq. But did you know there's a war raging in Egypt? A war has been going on in northern Sinai for 8 years. But why don't we hear about it? For Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, an ongoing war in the Sinai is not a good look. In response, Sisi is determined to control the information on what is going on there.
The Egyptian regime does not allow any independent journalist or any independent civil society organization, or for that matter, anyone, to report from Sinai. And if anyone reported in a way that does not serve or toe the military line, then they could be subjected to a military tribunal.
He has imprisoned at least 32 journalists, 22 of which are held without trial. His government has outlawed any reporting that deviates from his narrative. And when it comes to Sinai specifically, he has sought to reinforce his hardline reputation.
ستقوم القوات المسلحة والشرطة المدنية بالثأر لشهدائنا واستعادة الأمن والاستقرار بمنتهى القوة.
This narrative has dominated local television, with popular presenters back in Cairo urging on the destruction.
سيد الرئيس امبارح قال لك القوة الغاشمة اللي هي عندك الاف 16 الرافال، اضرب عندك الاباتشي، استخدم كل القوة اللي عندك، دمر، احنا خلاص الموضوع خلص.
جهد بناء وجهد غير عادي، الحقيقة جهد بنشكرهم عليه.
الجيش العظيم بيحقق بطولات كبيرة جدا في جبل الحلال.
Local journalists reporting also provides legitimacy to all the warmongering.
الثقة المطلقة في القائد علشان الوضع اللي احنا فيه بيقول كده.
فخور النهارده أنا على جبل الحلال.
The Egyptian military has been heavily attacking cities in the northeast, where according to Human Rights Watch, they've demolished nearly 4,000 buildings in 2018 alone, as part of a systematic campaign that has displaced and killed thousands.
Many of the practices are violating the existing constitution at the moment, and many of the laws in Egypt. The kidnapping, the extrajudicial killing, the mass extrajudicial killing, the blowing up of homes, blowing up of houses, attacking residential areas, and I'm not talking about the mass detention, the treatment inside the prison, and the absence of due process. Two main towns that one was almost completely destroyed, which is Rafah, and the other is probably somewhere between 50 to 70% of it were destroyed, which is Sheikh Zayed. Al-Arish, parts of it, which is the actual city, the capital of the governorate, parts of it were also destroyed, and some neighborhoods were destroyed.
The aggression in the region is in response to what the Egyptian government calls terrorism. But the local Bedouins have been alienated and neglected by the Egyptian government for years. Human Rights Watch has reported a shortage of food and water. So what does this all mean for Egypt? Will the country, under Sisi, seemingly have an endless war on its hands?
Damascus has had war on its hands for years, and despite the deceptive appearance of peace stemming from misleading reports and hastily announced victories, the country is still plagued by violence and instability, as the residents of Idlib were reminded of just recently. The town was reportedly struck several times by Russian bombers, injuring numbers of people, including children, and shattering a fragile ceasefire reached between Damascus and rebel groups in the region. The region in and around the Tigris and Euphrates seems to be the chief focus of the world's leading nations, including Japan, who recently announced plans to deploy warships and warplanes to the area to collect intelligence. The country also has a stated interest in protecting its merchant vessels which transverse and sail the region and have come under suspicious attack in times past. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has attempted to play a mediating role between Washington and Tehran, principally because of its alliance with the U.S., which carries its expectations and obligations, and also its heavy dependence up until this point on Iranian oil. It was actually during a trip to Iran by Prime Minister Abe to try and broker peace that Japanese ships were hit in the Gulf of Oman. America pointed the finger at Iran. And afterwards, the current U.S. administration ramped up pressure on Japan to contribute more monetarily and otherwise to the international defense. It is also suspected that the recent move by Abe then was designed in part to offer a small gesture of compliance. There is large-scale non-compliance sweeping through Lebanon as economic instability in the country has lowered the value of the country's national currency and also led to severe restrictions on bank withdrawals of the U.S. dollar. Please have a look.
I've been coming here for the last 3 days. I only could take $300.
The Persians are promising not to withdraw their rage until they have achieved retaliation following the slaying of one of the country's most admired leaders, General Qasem Soleimani. Iran and all of its allies are all pledging revenge, including Hezbollah, whose leadership announced that it is now okay to strike American personnel in the region. The Iraqi government has passed non-binding legislation to boot the U.S. from the country, while Tehran has reportedly expressed intentions to target Israeli cities and has completely withdrawn from the nuclear treaty. In response, President Trump has promised sanctions to Iraq if U.S. soldiers are forced to leave, and he is deploying an additional 3,500 troops and more missiles to the region, with a promise to Iran to strike back hard in the event of any aggression. For IPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, it looks like Iran is holding the Strait of Hormuz there as their ace in the hole if things get too bad. Well, continuing with Iran, former CIA Director David Petraeus said of the killing of Soleimani, the Iranian Major General, "This is bigger than bin Laden. It's bigger than Baghdadi. This is the most powerful figure in Iran for the solidification of the Shia Crescent and also the operational commander of the actions they were pushing." So, as you mentioned there, it's this was a very, very high-profile individual affecting many, many people.
Lindsey Graham said of Iran, the Iranian government is basically trying to take over Iraq's political system. Iran is bribing Iraqi politicians, and Lindsey said to the Iraqi people, he said, don't allow your politicians to turn Iraq into a proxy of Iran. So many people in the United States, the Senate and Congress are kind of speaking out to the people of Iran, say, hey, or Iraq in this case, don't allow Iran to take over your area as well. So it's a continual push against the Iranian government.
Well, along with those statements, President Trump is warning Iran that it will strike back harder if it is attacked, as Iran has vowed revenge for the U.S. drone strike that killed Iran's top military commander. Now, mourners filled the streets of the city of Avas, where the remains of the military commander have been returned from Iraq. Now, meanwhile, more U.S. troops are headed to the region along with equipment from North Carolina and their destination, Kuwait.
Shia Muslims have been marching in the streets in funeral processions to show their grief, and the Prime Minister has declared 3 days of national mourning. In Tehran, mourners declared revenge to the U.S. for the drone strike that killed Soleimani. One mourner said, "We will avenge our general's death. It was not just one person who was killed, it was the whole country." Well, that revenge has already started with 2 rocket strikes from Iran near Baghdad in the heavily fortified Green Zone near the U.S. Embassy, and another strike on an air base housing U.S. troops.
Another mourner stated, "All Iranians loved him. He was the general of our hearts. It's like I've lost my own father. The pain I feel won't be gone until we take revenge." Now, Soleimani was the mastermind behind Iran's military engagement in the Middle East for the last 2 decades and a close ally of Iran's supreme leader. Now, in a meeting with Soleimani's daughter, Iran's supreme leader vowed revenge for her father's death, saying that everyone will get revenge for your father's blood. Don't you worry about that.
Well, President Trump warned that the U.S. is ready to respond if Iran should strike Americans or its assets, and has repeatedly claimed that Soleimani's killing was necessary to protect American lives.
Well, finally, in a press conference, President Trump responded to questions about his statement requesting NATO do more in Iran. Well, when questioned to clarify, he said, "I spoke to Secretary General," referring to the Secretary General of NATO, yesterday, and he was very excited. Now, the president went on to declare how great he was at formulating names, and this time the name being NATO Me, referring to NATO Middle East. Now, the goal is to put more NATO personnel in the region as opposed to U.S. forces, because this is an international problem. So, again, referring to, speaking to the Attorney General there, saying we need NATO's involvement in the Middle East, not just that of the United States.
Right, right. Interesting. Well, he concluded by saying we can come home or largely come home and use NATO. This is an international problem, he repeated. We caught ISIS. We did Europe a big favor by catching ISIS. So it sounds like, the president is saying, hey, look, we cleared the path of your enemies. Now it's time for NATO to basically step up to the plate and start taking care of the bad guys. And of course, we're seeing this continual buildup of war in that region. But, just thinking about, our very first article, it starts when they're very young. It starts that war, that mindset starts at a very young age. 2 children, young people were injured as a result of a stabbing. But, what caused that to begin with? Well, as they grow up and become leaders, this is what they do on an international scale. So we can see that unless training starts very early in life to guide young people into moral principles that will help them to make better choices, they'll eventually become leaders who will strive for war.
Right, and as you mentioned there, just a very simple thing of conflict resolution, learning how to solve problems in a peaceful manner, right. A little give and take if need be, but as long as they're able to solve it in a means that doesn't bring harm to themselves or, referring to the nations, the inhabitants of those cities, those nations, states, and so forth, that really are the ones that suffer the most. So,
right.
You know, it is a great point starting in the schools there. And, you know, we see that they're being taught about these lesbian, gay, bisexual, and so forth. That's being pushed, but they should really be pushing that moral education to give them a foundation, so when they do grow up to be some of our future leaders, they'll have that in their minds to be able to lead in a peaceful manner.
That's the start the young people need. And if you're wondering what you can do to help your family to get off on the right foot or to have a positive start in life, and it really doesn't matter what age you are, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the prophetic word and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com. Visit them on any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, or yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. Any international calls, you can call the number that you see on your screen now. And again, if you have not yet looked at the Yisrael Says program or the Ask Yisrael program, go to yisraelsays.com or askisrael.com. You can type in any question, any scriptural question or word search. You're guaranteed to find pages and pages of information that will enlighten your understanding on the Holy Scriptures.
Well, while the world leaders are preparing for war, Yisrael Hawkins is preparing those who follow him for peace. Stay tuned, because up next is a great message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for joining us.